Hello, this is Brian. Today is a crisp, cool Wednesday, February 12th, 2020. I am near the back of Blue Jay Campground at the second San Juan Trailhead. The first one is at the front of the campground. And today I want to present a spotlight on trees. Well, this time it's going to be more of a shrub, but it's a shrub that anybody who comes into any contact with chaparral will come to know very well. It's one of the most common chaparral species ever. One of the most common shrubs in California, especially Southern California. I want to present to you the common chamise. This is Adenostoma fasciculatum, variety fasciculatum. It is a medium to quite large shrub in the rose family, Rosaceae. Rose family has a lot of representative species here in Southern California and here in the Santa Ana Mountains. Now, chamise comes in multiple varieties. The most common variety is variety fasciculatum. Adenostoma fasciculatum, variety fasciculatum, which is what this is right here. This is the typical species of chamise you're going to find when you're in chaparral. There are at least one or two more varieties of chamise, which I'm going to discuss maybe a little bit towards the end of the video, because this focuses on the common chamise, variety fasciculatum. Now, let's jump in right to morphology. Again, medium to quite large shrub, sometimes up to about 10 feet tall. I've seen them quite tall and quite large. And you can tell it's a very finely textured plant because the leaves are so small. The seeds, these are the old seed heads. They come from those small white flowers in the spring. Usually towards mid-spring, this shrub will send up these kind of like panicles of white flowers that, when the shrub's in full bloom, are quite attractive. Quite beautiful, actually. And then they turn into these dry seeds towards the end of summer and mid-fall. Quite a beautiful plant. And another thing contributing to the fine texture, how small the leaves are. It's hard to see with a camera. You really have to see them in person. They're small, needle-like, and they're bundled together on alternating segments of the twig. See here, if you look carefully, you can see that they're kind of bundled together. That's where the name fasciculatum comes from, fascicled or bundled. And that's what the leaves are like on Adenostoma fasciculatum, variety fasciculatum. Here's a more vigorous young twig here. Now, this is one of the hardiest shrubs you're going to come across in the chaparral. One of the hardiest plants you're going to come across, because it is so tough and so resilient. And here's why. First of all, the shrub has a huge root burrow where the stems connect to at the soil. Sometimes you can see the root burrow slightly above soil, but a lot of times you won't see it. Sometimes you will see a little burrow above the soil. I'm trying to see if I can see it. No, I can't really see it. I just see the stems connecting at the base of the plant. They have a kind of a roundish root burrow from which it can sprout when it gets burnt or coppiced or cut or whatever. Whatever damage occurs to it, it can resprout, and it does, and it often does very quickly because it's very well adapted to the dry Mediterranean climate of the chaparral. And what happens is they send up these branches, and this is not actually a prime example of what I want to show you with the bark. The bark is kind of grayish with some brownish hues, and it's very stringy and shreddy. You can get a little taste of it here. You can see it kind of shreds a little bit, but I've seen where the bark shreds quite voraciously. I'm going to try to see if I can find it. It's such a common plant, you're going to barely go a few steps without seeing it. if you're in lower elevation chaparral. You can see some of the peeling and stringiness of the bark right here. Now, why are the leaves so small? Well, it's an adaptation to the dry climate. Less surface area means less transpiration, less water loss. Because you're in an area where water's at a premium, especially for 70% of the year. Sometimes more in drought years. Again, here's a very good example of the bundling of the foliage of the plant. Now, elevation range. Common chamise can be found from basically roughly about sea level, usually about 1,000 feet, but common chamise is usually found a little bit above 1,000 feet, but they can be found down practically towards sea level, and it's usually found below 5,500 feet. However, I have seen it as high as 6,400 feet, and I've seen it above 6,000 feet numerous times. Most people, say 5,000 feet is the cutoff, but that is far from the case. I've seen this as high as 6,400 feet underneath the top of Pacifico Mountain in the Angeles National Forest. Here's a better example of the shreddy bark and the multi-stemmed aspect. See how very shreddy this is? Common chamise does have a very close relative, also in the genus Adenostoma, and it's Adenostoma sparcifolium, the redshanks. And the redshanks does not have fascicled leaves. They're small and linear, but they're not fascicled. And the bark is very shreddy, just like this, only to even a larger extent. See how shreddy that is? Redshanks is about 3 times shreddier than this. And that's a much larger shrub, up to 25, sometimes close to 30 feet tall. So common chamise is basically found, I believe, from Baja California, up the coast ranges, up the lower slopes of the Sierra Nevada, all the way up to, I think, about the 40th parallel, I want to say, in Northern California. So it does have a wide distribution in California. I don't think it quite grows into Oregon, but I think it might get close. But don't quote me on that. Again, beautiful shrub, and the resin content is very high in this plant. Means it burns. It can burn quite easily. And it can help actually make fires worse, which in a way kind of favors the chamise because it's very evolutionarily adapted to resprouting from fire and sending up seedlings en masse. Now, one thing is, when you see a chamise seedling or a young sprout, the leaves look very different. I don't see any examples here, but chamise seedlings and young juvenile shoots have feathery kind of pinnate-shaped leaves, but they're very finely textured. But you're not going to see that. You're not going to see that much unless you see some coppice shrubs where new shoots are coming up, or if you're going to see seedlings coming up after fire. So, this is, well, probably the most common shrub here in the Santa Ana Mountains, where I am right now. About an elevation of 3,300 feet here. But again, I have seen it significantly above 6,000 feet, and I've seen it down near sea level. Now, there are a couple other varieties. Adenostoma fasciculatum variety obtusifolium is the San Diego chamise. The leaves are less linear and a little more blunt. They're still fascicled, and it grows basically scattered along the San Diego and southern Orange County coast. And a little bit smaller of a shrub, but still beautiful white flowers. Still the same properties, basically. But it's a coastal shrub. And then you got, I believe, I don't know if it's a full horticultural variety or if there's actually a wild variety called variety prostratum, which grows prostrate. And I think, in other words, it grows along the ground, kind of like a ground cover. And that's found, I believe, in Central California. Unless it's it could be a horticultural variety, I'm not sure. But I have read about it and heard about it, so that could be another possible variety. But yeah, when you're out, look for common chamise. Extremely beautiful plant. Beautiful plant, so common. It's hard to bushwhack through, so if you're doing cross country in chaparral, good luck. Like a lot of chaparral shrubs, it's very dense and forms very dense thickets. The lower elevations, you'll find it a lot of times on both south and north facing slopes, but especially on north facing slopes at lower elevations. Once you get to higher elevations, like towards the 6,000 foot mark, you're going to start seeing it more on south-facing slopes, because the north-facing slopes will basically be covered in conifers. Now, sometimes chamise will invade coastal sage scrub with sages and sagebrush, laurel sumac, and sometimes it will be found under the canopy of oaks and sometimes even conifer trees in our mountains. So it's not always going to be in the chaparral, but it's mostly going to be in the chaparral. So sometimes you'll find it in the understory of forest and woodland, and sometimes you'll find it in coastal sage scrub, sometimes with some very dry area plants like white sage and stuff like that. But there it is. About at least half of these shrubs are chamise. So, once again, you don't have to travel far to find chamise unless you live where there are just miles and miles and miles and miles of concrete jungle. If you want to come to a chaparral jungle like this, come and visit some chamise. Pay some homage to one of the hardiest plants you're going to find besides some of the really, really gnarly desert plants. Oh, another note. This shrub is found both on the coastal side of the mountains and also on the desert side. I have seen this plant growing with toyon, coast live oak, and I've also seen it growing with Joshua tree, Tucker oak, and single-leaf pinyon. So this also can be found in the desert side of the mountains, but not in full desert conditions. But like I said, I've seen it mixed in with Joshua tree along Angeles Crest Highway and Highway 138 on the north side of the San Gabriel Mountains. And that bird you hear chirping, wren tit, very common resident in chamise chaparral, Chamise fasciata. So, hope you found this video interesting. Stay tuned for the next episode of Spotlight on Trees. Beautiful day out here in the Santa Ana Mountains. Come out to check out the chaparral. Listen to the wren tit birds. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.